Hello and welcome to the Ground and Grow podcast. I'm your host, Kayla Estinson Williams. So this week, as of last night, my kiddo has come down with just her second cold of the season. So I know so many other folks have had way more sicknesses in their family. So I'm like, I know we're lucky. It's only our second. But it feels a little stressful. I have this week and next week before I'm taking a couple weeks off for the holidays. And so these weeks are a little packed. I had this big certification test scheduled at the end of the week for me and blocked off that day for clients and everything. And I have like a 48-hour window for which I can reschedule it, or I have to pay for it all over again, and it's pretty expensive. So I just said, there's a good chance I will be coming down with the sickness, and that might be my worst day of it. So I'm just going to postpone it, rescheduled it last night. I think sometimes when you are a parent and your little one's sick, the moment you start to see those symptoms, you're like, okay, how can I rework my week? One, to kind of figure out any childcare changes that we need to do. But two, so that I can prepare myself for if I end up getting sick, right? So there's two waves of it, which is tough. And for me, it's something that I feel really stressed about because I have this anxious planner part that likes to have everything planned, predict it, know what's going to happen. And so having a kiddo who gets sick a lot in the winter, as all little kiddos do, has given me lots of opportunities to practice that. So this week I'm practicing it, adjusting it as we need to. But yeah, while I'm stressed to push off that certification test, I'm also okay, now I don't have to worry and have that hanging in the balance on, am I going to be able to do it or not? And then I have a little more time to study. So that'll be good. But yeah, that is the week that I'm entering into. That's kind of my main update of the week. Holidays are coming. So right now you can't, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can't see it because it's out of frame intentionally. But I just have a lot of boxes and mess for Christmas gifts and all of that stuff. So I'm hoping, I think on Thursday I'm going to not open spots for clients. One, because I might end up getting sick anyways. But two, if I end up not being super sick and being able to have childcare, it'd be nice to get some of that done because that is not easy to do with a toddler around. She wants to get into everything. So I'm hoping to maybe whittle some of the Christmas to-do list things later this week. We'll see. But without further ado, let's get into kind of our new segment where I'll share a story of that someone's sharing for this one. It's going to be another one on Reddit, and go into some psychoed related stuff. So I will read this. This is from Am I the Asshole? If you are a Redditor, you know this podcast or this Reddit, I don't know, whatever it's called, the thread thing that can show up. So this one is titled, Am I the Asshole for Playing Dumb When My Father Tried Showing Me Off to His Friends? I really hate how my parents will try to show me off to other people, ordering me to tell them about my accomplishments, etc. I have no interest in showing off. Other people don't need to know about what I've done, etc. I really hate how they try to take ownership of my life by bringing up my activities themselves to look good in front of their friends. I don't do tricks on command like a seal. If it's my activity, shouldn't I be bringing it up? It doesn't make sense why he feels the need to introduce parts of my life on my behalf when I'm in the room. It makes me feel like he thinks I'm too stupid to speak for myself. Some of my parents' friends came over for dinner tonight. At one point, one of them mentioned how he lived in France for 10 years. My father then said to me, "Oh, you speak French, don't you? Speak some French for him." And the other guy looked at me expectantly. I had enough of this, so I played dumb, and I said, "What? I don't speak French." My father didn't get the hint and kept saying, "Haven't you always spoken it? You don't want to speak some now?" And I kept saying I never spoke it. After they left, he got angry at me for embarrassing him. I told him I didn't like how he was trying to embarrass me and that my activities are not for him to show off. and asked him why he didn't get the hint the first time. Okay, so I think this one is pretty clear in the votes. It's pretty unanimous, right? Like, this person's not the asshole. Like, it would be frustrating to have that pattern where parents try to bring up your accomplishments and show you off in this way that maybe doesn't feel good for you. We can see, right? Like, maybe part of this intention is that this person's parents are so proud of this, their kiddo, who's I'm guessing is an adult. They're maybe so proud of them and want to boast about these things. They want to share these things. Maybe parents even think that their kid likes it, right? Like, maybe they think that it is a way of showing pride or different things, right? So we don't really know parents' full intentions. And yet it makes sense that this would be a frustrating dynamic and is due for a conversation. And I think, obviously, I don't know the full like family history or extent of dynamics or whatnot, but I wouldn't be surprised if that is maybe something that parents have for themselves as well as for their kid, kind of like raise them in this way of like, your worth is related to what you do, your accomplishments, right? Maybe that's not the case, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was really like pushed on the kids in this family of like, oh, hey, you got to do well. That's like how you do well in life, right? If you meet these accomplishments and if you are successful in these ways, quote unquote successful, that might be a real big theme in the family dynamic. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing to support your kids in meeting their goals and growing and like, you know, making, having accomplishments. But the important thing is one, are those accomplishments actually meaningful for that person? Or are they just parents' accomplishments, right? So kind of redefining what success means, because it gets to mean something different for kids and adults. That's okay. Each person has their own set of values and goals. And so what I feel is a successful life for me is probably very different than what is a successful life for someone else, right? Like, we all get to define what that is for ourselves. But two, it's important, right? Even if this person's accomplishments are maybe they're very driven by themselves, or it's something that they're excited about or just doing on their own volition, great. But it's important that what's really communicated and felt with that dynamic with parents is that, hey, these accomplishments are great and we can be proud of you for that and we can be excited that you're doing it. And whether you do those or not, like, we still love you and you are so worthy and all of that stuff, right? So the sense that I get is that when parents have friends around and they're trying to show their kid off and their kid's accomplishments off in this way, probably not intentionally, but in a way, it kind of communicates like, hey, these are the things that make you special. These are the things that make you worthy, right? Especially because it's such a big pattern. It's not just a one-off like, oh, hey, here's this like big thing that happened, right? It's more of this is like a pattern of behavior that shows up frequently. And I don't know how old this person is who's writing it. Like, if they're younger, if they're a teenager, right? Like, I wouldn't expect them to have to like start off with a skillful conversation of like sitting mom and dad down and being like, hey, this is what I'm feeling in these moments and this is what we need to change, right? But maybe if they're an adult, they've kind of done their own work. Or if you here are listening in and you're like, ooh, we have a similar dynamic in my family and I want to shift that. The psycho ed that I will talk about today is a communication skill called Dear Man. And this is really how we can set the framework to ask for a request for some change or a boundary in a relationship in a way that supports the relationship. It's a communication skill I teach to a lot of my clients that I have personally found super helpful. And it's great with that, right? So this could either be, for this like Reddit example, they might choose to do a Dear Man after this experience to kind of clarify it a little bit more of like, this is what it makes me feel and this is what I want to shift. Or, ideally in some circumstances, it might be something that we can bring up before we have this like moment of tension, or it comes out in this like tough way. But no, to kind of sum up that am I the asshole thing, right? No. I think it's okay, right? Like, you played dumb and you felt embarrassed in that situation, so you kind of turned it over to dad, right? Like, I think that's okay, right? Like, maybe there are other skillful ways to do it, right? But I don't think like you're doing something wrong by being like, you know what, I'm going to be a little sassy in this moment, right? Because it's something that you feel frustrated with. And I will add, if you are looking for a more skillful way to approach it, that is not so like in the moment of something, then you might want to go into a dear man and kind of prevent it from happening again, right? So I'll talk about dear man, and then I'll talk about, like, I'll use this situation as an example. This is great skill for like so many different things that you might communicate with anyone. Really, if there's ever something that you're like, I want to communicate this to someone, but I'm not really sure how to do it without them feeling defensive or hurt, or I'm having a hard time owning what I need, a dear man is a great place to do that. So Dear Man is a DBT, a dialectical behavioral therapy skill. That's just a set. DBT is just a set of a ton of really awesome skills that I think are great life skills that we all need, and Dear Man is one of them. I used to be a DBT group facilitator and do individual DBT back when I was a baby therapist, and I'm really glad I did, because I got to learn so many skills that I will now just pop in with, just like regular sessions all the time. And Dear Man is one of the top ones that I use. So this, like many of the other DBT skills, is a lovely little acronym. So I'll just quickly go through the acronym and then we'll talk about how you could use it here. So the dear part is the script, and that is essentially what you are going to say. And then the man is like how you're going to say, or what you want to be intentional about when you're framing this. And I always tell folks, before you even start kind of figuring out your script for the dear man, think about what your objective is. What is the thing that you're looking to assert? What is the outcome that you want? Think about that ahead of time, because that's going to help you figure out what information is important to include, as well as what information is kind of irrelevant, right? Because I think sometimes, especially if it's a frustration that has been really built up in a relationship, we might throw in a bunch of different topics or conversations into one, and that's when it gets messy, and that's when defenses are going to get high, and that's when it's like really hard to kind of identify like what is the goal here, right? So keep it one topic at a time, right? So for this example, it's going to be probably, hey, mom and dad, like I don't want you to do this anymore, right? Like I don't want you to bring up my accomplishments with others. Allow me to bring it up if it's something that I want to talk about with your friends, and just allow me to exist as I am in the moment if it's not. So the acronym for the DEAR is describe. So here's where you're going to factually describe what's going on. This is not going to be the place that we put in opinions or, different judgmental statements or anything like that. It is just factually describing information that is relevant. So we might be describing that specific situation, or we might be describing a pattern of behavior that's led up to it. The express is where we get to put in our emotions as well as our opinions. So it's important that we state them as our emotions and our opinions. So not necessarily like this is wrong to do, right? But it might be more of an opinion of like, hey, from my perspective, like this is what I feel about it. And then using those I statements for feeling statements, right? So not you make me feel this, but I feel this when this happens, right? Assert is where we specifically name our objective, right? So we are directly and clearly communicating what we want to happen, what we want to change. I think this is one that if we're not really thinking about communicating this in a super skillful way, is the piece that we kind of forget. We might be like, this is what happened and this is how I feel about it. But if we don't tell the other person what we want to shift and change, or what boundary we're needing, we have to realize that they're not going to be able to read our mind and know that that's what we want, right? Because everyone might want to navigate these things in different ways, right? So it's important to really directly communicate exactly what we're wanting to shift. Sometimes if it's more of an open-ended thing, right? If it's like you're talking to your partner about just like, oh, hey, like we keep getting into tips about this like topic of how we clean the kitchen or whatever, something. If you're not sure exactly what you want to change, it might be like, hey, can we have a discussion and brainstorm some ideas together, right? So it's okay if you don't know exactly what you want to change, but if there's something where it's like, oh, let's brainstorm together, let's sit down and kind of create a list of things for us to try out, that's okay too. And then we have our reinforce. So this is where we share why it's beneficial for both of us, right? So it might be, um, getting along better, having more fun together. It can also even just be, I would really appreciate it. It would be meaningful for me, right? So showing some level of reinforce can be nice here. Here's where you might also, if this is like a pattern of things that has come up, maybe there have been some previous conversations, some progress, some work, but maybe not exactly where you want it to be, right? Your reinforce might be, hey, the things that we have done before to make progress on this have been really beneficial. I've really appreciated them. And this next step, I think, could make a big difference. So that's the dear, that's the script. And then we have the man part, which is how we do it. So we want to be mindful, we want to stay on topic, we want to just be intentional about what is the information that we're going in with. Sometimes if we're sharing something, maybe if the other person is getting defensive or having a hard time with it, they might be bringing up other topics. So we might kind of want a broken record, like, hey, I know that's an important topic. Let's talk about it another time. Right now, I just want to talk about this. Right. So sometimes we just have to like repeat exactly what our objective is over and over again. And here, being mindful, if we notice like this conversation is going off, maybe we're both getting too intense, or maybe it's like we're not getting anywhere. What we might also do is say, hey, like, I think we need to table this conversation. We both need to take a break, take some time. I want to come back to this day, this time, or whatever, or in 15 minutes, or, figure out a time to come back to this conversation. Can be part of how you're being mindful with it too, if it's just not going well. The A is for appear confident. So here, you might not actually be confident. A lot of us struggle with bringing up vulnerable things or having tough conversations, right? It's not an easy skill for most people. So you're probably not going to be feeling super confident about it. But what is with this, right? You might do some like affirmations ahead of time of like, hey, this is like how I can be skillful in my relationships, or I am allowed to assert my needs. My needs and feelings are allowed to be different than someone else's, and it's okay for me to express them, right? So remind yourself why it's okay to do this. It's okay to be skillful here. And try to appear confident in that moment, right? Doesn't mean you have to be super phony or fake, and certainly don't come off as like aggressive, right, in this other intensity, but trying to take some deep breaths, do what you need to try to like hold your head up high. You might not appear super confident, but it's a practice, right? Allowing yourself to be like, I'm going to be present and engaged in this conversation, and as I keep practicing communicating my needs, it's going to become a little bit easier over time. It probably won't the first few times. That's okay. And then the last one is negotiate. So this, I say, is an as needed thing, right? So if you are using a little dear man to like ask for someone to cover a shift at work for you, you might be doing a little mini dear man. Here you might throw in a negotiate right away, right? Like, oh, hey, if you can take this shift, like I'm happy to take the next holiday for you, or something like that, right? We might throw a negotiate in right away. Or our negotiate might kind of be a, hey, I'm trying to think of how we can brainstorm this. Let's come up with ideas together. So that can be how we negotiate. But otherwise, I'd say like keep your negotiate in your back pocket. Know what you're going to be comfortable negotiating on, and know what boundaries you don't want to negotiate on. And also be aware that there are going to be some conversations that you're just not going to negotiate at all, right? So, for example, like let's say you're talking with a family member who, when the two of you are arguing, this other person is yelling and swearing at you, right? You might be doing a dear man to say like, hey, like I want to continue having these conversations and working through these problems, and I'm not okay with you swearing at me, or I'm not okay with you name calling me. We're not going to negotiate and be like, well, you can just sometimes name call me or swear at me, right? We're going to be firm on that, right? And so that boundary might be, if you name call me or if you swear at me, I'm not going to participate in that conversation anymore, and we're going to have to come back to it another time, right? You got to be firm on that. It's not like you can call me some mean word 3 times before I do that, right? There might be somewhere we just don't negotiate at all. We hold that firm boundary. So it really depends. And like, Dear Man is a skill, and it's a skill we build. And if you're not very well practiced in owning your needs, knowing that they're valid, and communicating them, this might be a really, really hard skill. So if you're hearing this now and you're like, there's no way I'm doing this, that's when I think it can be really helpful to process this and talk about this with a therapist to kind of build in that inner strength around it and then start practicing it. You can practice it with your therapist. You can build the scripts with your therapist and then practice them in your real life. Start with people who you're more likely for it to be effective with, right? So let's say you have a really tough relationship with your mom and conversations do not go well, you are not heard, there's maybe some like verbal abuse or things like that. Don't start your Dear Man with that person, right? Start with a friend, your partner, a different family member who is more on the same page, right? So kind of build your confidence with it, and then you can know how to build up in the more tricky ones. I say, like, when you're practicing the skill, like, practice it with silly things. When I was learning this and teaching it to my groups, I'd practice it with my cat because he would, like, at that time I lived in an apartment in a duplex, and we had kind of flimsy cabinets. And my cat, like, if you know me, you know my cat is like a little bread boy. Like, he could eat like a loaf of bread, and his like thing was he'd like open the cabinets and like feast on bread. So we had to like start closing them in different ways. But I'd practice like a silly Dear Man with him of, describing and expressing and telling him what I needed and all of that. Not that my cat really listened to it, right? Like, that's not the point. It was just to practice and get in the groove of it. So practice in some light ways if you can. But now let's kind of go through what this person might do with their family based on like a Dear Man script. Again, I don't know the full story. I don't know the relationship dynamics. So their actual Dear Man might be very different than what I'm saying, but this is just kind of an example so we can get the feel of it. So first, they're identifying their objective. Let's say their objective here is, Mom and Dad, I don't want you to bring up my accomplishments when we're around other people. I want to be able to authentically bring them up if I want to share. Otherwise, I want you to just allow me to be in those moments and join in conversation how I want to, right? So the describe, now we kind of know our objectives, we can formulate the information based on that. So their describe might be, hey, like, I've noticed this pattern where when we're around your friends, you tend to bring up my accomplishments and want me to share those. There was that recent example when your friends were over and you asked me to speak French with them. And I didn't. You felt embarrassed by it, and I felt embarrassed by it. We had a tough conversation after that. But there's been this pattern of behavior where you will throw out my accomplishments and want me to share in that conversation with your friends. Express. In those moments, I feel kind of embarrassed. And while I don't know that this is your intention, in those moments, it makes me feel like you see my worth as a person as my accomplishments. So here's where we can kind of bring in an opinion, but we can state, hey, I don't know if this is actually how you're feeling or why you're doing it, but that's how I'm feeling when it happens, right? Our assert. So here's where we really frame that objective. Hey, when we are with your friends or with other people, please don't bring up my accomplishments or guide me into like talking about them with them. If it's something that I want to share about, I will authentically bring it up, and I'm happy to do that. But I want to be able to feel like I can just engage in conversation however I'd like to. So please don't bring up my accomplishments in a way that leaves me feeling like I have to join in and talk about that with your friends. Reinforce. Hey, this is going to allow me to enjoy spending time with you and your friends more. It's also going to help in our relationship because I'm going to feel like you appreciate my presence regardless of if we're sharing about my accomplishments or not. Is that something that you're willing to do, right? So sometimes we might end it with like, can we do that, right? So we can see it's not super long, it's not super detailed. Sometimes we have to if it's a really big thing, but it's kind of a quick, like, little paragraph of things we're going to share. And then in this, of course, we're going to want to be mindful, stay on topic. If there's other things that they're frustrated with parents about, let's leave that to the side. Want to appear confident. Of course, it's okay to express this. Even if parents don't have any ill will about it, you are allowed to want to shift that and change it. And the negotiate here, I would say it's really not a negotiate, right? Like, we're allowed to say, hey, this is my boundary. And let's say parents are having a hard time with that, or let's say you had this conversation and then parents continued to do it. We might repeat it and be like, hey, remember what I expressed here? We might go through that whole dear man again, but with our assert what we're expressing, we might be more firm on that boundary of, hey, if you continue to do that, I'm going to leave the conversation, or I'm going to address it in the moment that, hey, please don't do that. I might act dumb again. I might play dumb again. So that we can kind of let them know, I'm not going to take on the embarrassment and the stress and the frustration in that moment. I might throw it back at you, right? It might be unpleasant for you, right? So not that we want to be spiteful or add really turn up the volume on it, make it super intense necessarily, but we can just kind of say this isn't going to go well for you. I'm not going to participate in it anymore. And so if that happens again, this is how I'm going to respond, right? So we get to figure out what feels authentic for us. For me, it might just be I'm going to leave the conversation if that shows up. So that is Dear Man, and that's how you might structure it for this conversation. If you're in the future, if you're what was that skill again? You can Google Dear Man. There's tons of worksheets and things you can find online. It's a really easy one to Google and get information on, so you can practice it yourself. Again, if you're doing it either for the first time or if you are practicing it for something really tough, I think it can be helpful to really write out your script. Sometimes you might even have your script with you and say hey, I'm trying to use this communication skill. I have a script of what I'm gonna say to you, and I just want to have it with me to make sure that I'm really clear and get all the points that are important to me. I know that can feel awkward and uncomfortable, and a little affirmation that I'll keep in my head is the relationships that are worth investing energy into are going to be the ones that understand we're investing that energy, right? They're going to be able to support us in that. And if they're not able to, right, that gives us some information, right? It's oh, this one might be a relationship I need more boundaries with if they can't, if they're making fun of me or pushing back on me being skillful. Not to say if it goes bad one time, be done with that relationship. But it might be, oh, if every single time I try to be skillful, it's not going well, then I might want to increase how many boundaries I have with that person, which doesn't mean cut off. It might at some point. But I hope that was helpful, and practice it, try it out, see how it goes, and know that using a Dear Man doesn't mean something is wrong with the relationship. Sometimes it does, but sometimes it just means that we want to shift and grow in it. So it can be a really great way to support relationships. So that is all for this week's episode. If you enjoyed this episode or enjoy this podcast, I would really appreciate a rate and review from wherever you're listening to help the podcast grow and other people to kind of trust in it and be oh yeah, it has some good ratings. Let's jump on it. If you want to share this episode with someone who you think can benefit, please do. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I look forward to checking in with you all next time.